Good evening, guys and gals. This is Brad Varnell of the Slight Edge Living YouTube channel, and I'm coming at you tonight from Las Vegas, and this is part 3 of my little poker hand session at the Orleans Hotel and Casino from a couple of nights ago. So to get right into the action, we've played for a little while now. There's been some ups and downs. We're pretty close to even at this point. And a hand comes along where I get an opportunity to kind of take advantage of that King 10 of spades hand that I told you guys about earlier. So in this particular hand, a couple of players limped in, and then a gentleman raises to 12. I look down at 6-8 of clubs and decide to peel off a flop and see what happens. So I call the 12, and we end up seeing the flop with 5 players, about 65 bucks in the pot, and we go to a flop. The flop comes very nicely for us, 4-5-7, giving us the nut straight. Unfortunately, it's the 4-5-7 of hearts, so we don't have the absolute nuts. Any flush out there beats us. But in this type of a situation, you can't really be scared of a made flush. It's hard to flop a flush, and so we got to play our hand relatively aggressively unless somebody really gives us a reason to believe that we are beat. But in general, unless a heart hits on the turn or the river, we're probably going to end up playing a substantial pot if somebody wants to. So anyways, on with the hand. Everybody checked to me, which was slightly surprising to me, but I wasn't going to just check. But I didn't want to blow everybody off the pot. I thought, the last time that I had kind of a draw hand that was on the, not, on the weaker side with that King 10, I bet kind of small. So I decided to do a similar bet. I bet 30 into the $65 pot. So I bet a little bit less than half. And sure enough, the little blind called, and one other player ended up... No, I take that back. We ended up heads up. So the other 2 players folded, including the pre-flop raiser, which was beautiful. I'm happy to be heads up. I'm in position. And I know that the little blind, after several of us calling, is going to be playing all sorts of hands. So very good possibility that my straight is in great shape here. And I definitely am excited to pretty much play the hand unless another heart comes off. So the turn card is a blank. It's the King of Diamonds. So now we got 4-5-7 of hearts and the King of Diamonds on the board. And the player checks to me. And so once again, in playing similar to the King 10, I decide that a big bet is in order, kind of like I made with the King 10 of spades. So I grab 80 and plop out 80. And he immediately, before my 80 has even touched the felt, has gone all in on me. Now, folks, this is where the video, if you didn't watch part 1 of the video, this is where when I talk about thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead comes in so important. In general, with poker, similar to chess and other strategy games, you don't want to just think about what you're going to do right now. You want to think about what you're going to do in different scenarios. Well, I had already sized up his stack. He had about 200 left in his stack. So once I bet the 80, I know I'm committed to calling because there's way too many hands that he can have that I have beat. He can have 2 pair, he could have a set potentially that want to, 2 pair or a set might want to just call on the flop, and then if it's a safe card like it was no more hearts, then he's ready to get it all in with only 1 card to come because he's thinking that I've got like the ace or the king of hearts in my hand. It could be on a draw. If he happens to have the ace or the king of hearts himself, that would be a pretty good turn card for him. Like if he's got king, queen with the king of hearts, he just made a pair of kings, and he's got the king high flush draw. So just the fact that he moved in really didn't worry me. I mean, it wasn't like I expected to have the nuts, but I knew I was going to have the best hand enough to definitely warrant getting the rest of the money all in. So my point is, I snap called. I think he was surprised by how fast I called. I mean, he moved all in, and I immediately threw my chips forward as a call because I knew what I was going to do ahead of times. Now, most of the time, that's the case. So if you're playing against me and I take some time, generally, it's because, like, say I check the river and you bet, and then I end up thinking for 15 or 20 seconds and I make the call. And I caught you in a bluff. Maybe I'm calling with a weak hand, second or third pair, and you were bluffing and I call and I win. Well, in situations like that, I don't want to just snap call because I don't want you to feel like you've been had. So in that type of a situation, I might check, let you bet, knowing I'm going to call full well knowing I'm calling your bet. I'm checking to induce your bet, but I still take a little bit of time and make it at least look like your bluff had some chance of succeeding. So in some situations, even when I know what I'm going to do ahead of time, I don't do it immediately. But in this particular situation, I didn't see a whole lot of reason to think about it. So I snap called and he turned over 5-7, no heart. And I end up winning a massive pot, no 5 or 7 on the river, and I pick up a real nice pot, and now I'm back up to ahead, about $300 on the night. I've doubled my 300, and life is good. And like I say, it's important to remember what you've done in the past in business and in success that's worked for you and didn't work for you. In this particular hand, I very much believe that the King 10 hand played a part in it, because one of the things that I forgot to mention in the last video is I actually showed my King 10. I probably shouldn't have. It was probably a little bit of an emotional thing, but this older gentleman that I won the hand against that showed his ace-4 suited with his grumbling and muttering and kind of berating me a little bit, I wanted to stick the needle in a little bit. I'm not going to lie. So I showed the King 10, and I normally don't show, and I normally don't recommend ever showing your cards when you don't have to. In some situations, I think it can be a decent move, and it can work out in your favor at a later time, but for the most part, it's just going to end up costing you money. And I'm not saying that this was a good time to show this bluff and let people know that I was capable of making plays like that. But once I had shown it and I knew that everybody had seen it, then at that point, I'm kind of stuck knowing that they've seen that hand and playing accordingly. So at least I was aware that people were viewing me as slightly over aggressive, a little bit crazy, willing to get all of my money in with just a draw and that type of stuff. So in that particular situation, it worked out pretty well for me, because I think I win a lot more money with this straight than I would have if the guy would have had more respect for my play and been a little bit more worried about what I was in there with. So on to the last hand. This table breaks and we're on to the third table of the night. We sit down. We've got in the ballpark at this point of a little around 550 in front of us. The main villain in this hand covers us. The second villain in this hand has a little over 300 or so. And we're in the big blind with pocket threes. And the gentleman with 300-ish raises to, I want to say it was 15, raises to 15, and a little bit of a backstory on the very first hand where I talked about having pocket tens in the big blind. This gentleman was the little blind, and I didn't really mention him in that hand, but the one thing that I do want to note now is that when it got folded around to him in the little blind on that hand where there was a $15 raise and two $15 calls, he said after the hand that he had folded ace-queen offsuit, which I'm not going to get into whether or not that's a good play or a bad play, but I will once again say that there's no good comes from telling people that type of stuff, because in my mind, it made him seem a little on the tight side. So he was definitely a guy that I wasn't going to give an overly high amount of action to. I figured if he's willing to fold ace queen in a little blind with 3 people already in there for 15, then A, he's probably a little bit on the tight side, and B, that doesn't mean that he's a bad player. It actually might mean that he's a good player, because he realizes that 15 is a relatively big raise size. He's got 3 people. He's out of position. So I actually don't mind folding ace-queen offsuit right there. I'd be okay with a call too, but I really don't like the fact that he announced it to everybody after the hand was over. And so going into this hand, after he raises to 15, it gets called in 2 places, including the second villain on the button, cold calls. And now I look down at pocket threes in the big blind and feeling like the original raiser is definitely a tighter player that's raising with solid hands. it's an automatic call with pocket threes, trying to flop a set and hopefully snap off a big pair and win a big pot. So onto the flop, about 4 players, $60 in the pot. The flop comes King Jack 3 with no suits, rainbow. So I flop a fantastic hand. I mean, I can't ask for anything better. Yeah, pocket jacks and pocket kings has me beat, but I'm way, way, way ahead of aces, ace king, queens, king jack, all many, many, many hands, queen 10 that have, an open-ended straight draw. But overall, I am ahead of a ton of the hands that, can be in there. And basically, if you flop a set against me, you're getting all my money. I don't think I've ever folded in a set over set situation, especially on the flop when there was no straight, no flush possible. I don't believe it's ever happened. I don't know if I'll ever fold a set on the flop with no straight draws and no flush draws. And even when there is straight and flush draws out there, it's pretty hard to get me to fold because I'm always able to convince myself that you could be on a semi bluff or have, a hand like in that particular spot, like say it came heart with the King Jack 3. I could convince myself that you've got ace king with the ace of hearts or so on and so forth. So long story short, if I flop a set and you have me beat, you're probably going to get all my money. So having said that, since we're all pretty deep, I wanted to get well, that's going to make for an interesting video there. My stand dropped on me, and now I'm stuck holding my stupid phone. So, anyways, to get back to the action, let me get this stabilized a little bit so that I'm not so blurry. And I decided to go ahead and lead because I wanted to build a big pot. So rather than just check raising, which looks kind of strong, a lot of people take what they call like a donk lead or a weak lead in this spot, and it's just like I said, if they believe that you're either a bad player or you have a weak hand that's trying to see a cheap turn. So I decided these guys didn't know anything about my play. If I was playing against a group of guys that I'd played with more, I probably would have maybe done something slightly different. But in this particular situation, I felt like a weak lead was perfect, and it worked out very well for me. I bet 30. The gentleman that had raised pre-flop raised to 70, and then it folded around to the button. And part of the reason that I'm talking about this hand is because I want to discuss the button's play a little bit. The button just moves all in at this point for about 600. So he's got me covered. He's obviously got the first player that raised to 70 covered. And I immediately snap called. And, for some of you that are pretty well poker versed, you definitely are thinking to yourself, well, maybe he's got a set of jacks or a set of kings, maybe you could be beat here. But I immediately snap called because in my head, I didn't see how he could ever have kings. There's no way that he's going to take a $15 opening call and then another caller in between him and just smooth call with kings on the button. He's always going to 3-bet it there with kings. And I think he's going to 3-bet a high percentage of the time with jacks. So I really discounted kings and jacks. And if he happens to have jacks, as I just said, if you flop a set and it, set over set situation, you're just going to have to take my money. So I do wish that I would have taken slightly more time to call because the third player in the pot did make the comment, wow, you called awfully fast there, and ended up folding his hand. And I don't know what he had. I never stuck around. I didn't hear what he had after the hand was over, but I probably should have taken a little bit more time. And I guess part of the reason that I didn't is I wanted to just make a move because if you've played a lot of poker, you've probably heard the term think long, think wrong. And so I didn't want to try to get a read and does he have jacks? Is there some way that he slow played kings? I didn't want to give myself a chance to make a bad fold, I guess, is what it really comes down to. I knew that I was going to call. But also in this situation, with the player that made it 70, and then this guy going all in for 500 and me calling, the guy's got about 300 behind. He's almost never calling in this particular spot. He's got to have just about exactly kings or jacks in order to be calling, and he's never folding kings or jacks even with that action. So it wasn't a horrible spot to just go ahead and get it all in, because I think he's folding aces and ace king every time, no matter what I do. But on the off chance that maybe I could have induced a call, I should have probably taken a little bit more time with my set of threes and given him an opportunity to maybe make a bad play with ace king or pocket aces. So long story short, as soon as he folded, the other guy said, "Oh no, you flopped a set of threes, didn't you?" And I say, "Yep, I got the threes." And he says, "Well, you're good." And then unfortunately for me, a king hit right on the turn. And he says, "Oh, you're not good anymore." And he turns over king jack. So I had him in a position where he was drawn almost dead. Not almost dead, but he's got 4 outs, which means I'm over an 80% favorite to have about 1,100 in front of me, maybe even a little bit more. 550 twice is 11 plus the other guy's money, probably more like 1,200 in front of me. So I go from a spot where I'm over an 80% favorite to have turned $300 into about 1,200 on the night, and instead I am walking out of the casino muttering to myself. But folks, that is poker. And I guess the moral of the story, this last hand, there really isn't a moral of the story other than, once again, giving you some insight as to how I deduced that the player that raised originally was, kind of a tighter, more solid, probably a reasonable player by his ace queen comment. And then the last thing that I want to talk about, though, the other important concept, if you're out there, is, maybe if you're watching this video, comment if you think I'm wrong, because I definitely am not arrogant enough to think that I am good enough at poker to know the right move in every situation. But to me, the gentleman on the button moving all in right there with his king jack was a pretty suspect play. In my opinion, he's never getting called when he's ahead, and he's almost always getting called when he's behind. As you saw, I had about the worst hand that I could have, which was pocket threes. But if somebody's got threes, jacks, or kings, he's always getting called. If they've got ace, king, or aces, he's probably always getting a fold. As deep as we were in a 1-3 game, with him having over 500 and me having over 500, somehow if I would have made it to that flop with a hand like ace, king, or aces, which is probably almost never going to happen, but I'm never calling. So really, like I said, I really think that one of the things to take from this hand is that he really played it poorly and got extremely lucky to end up winning. But the fact of the matter is he was gonna not win any more money every time that he had the best hand, and he was gonna lose all of his money a very high percentage of the time anytime he was beat. If I happen to have jacks or threes, he's just in horrible shape, and that's technically what ended up happening to him. So I really want, if you're out there thinking to yourself that I believe that he was playing scared poker. That's kind of what I call it. I believe that with king jack suited right there on a king jack 3 flop with a bet and a raise in front of him, that he should highly consider maybe even smooth calling and giving one of us that's got ace king or pocket aces an opportunity to hang ourselves. If he just smooth calls there, it looks like he could have a queen 10 for an open-ended straight draw, have a few hands. He's going to obviously know what the bad cards in the deck are. Like if he calls there and a 3 hits on the turn, that now puts aces and threes in front of him. It also would put ace king still behind him, but not be a scary card for ace king. So if the turn card's a 3, although he would be worried about aces, he still has ace king in real bad shape. If an ace hits on the turn, yeah, that's a horrible card. But if he's up against ace, king, or aces, there's only 2 or 3 aces left in the deck, and you can't be afraid of 2 and 3 outers. You gotta be willing to let players that have 2 or 3 outs hang themselves. So the other moral of this hand, if you're watching this and play a lot of poker, is don't overprotect your hands. The king jack gave himself an opportunity to lose the absolute maximum and win the absolute minimum. And in this particular situation, he ended up looking like a genius because he got called and got lucky and won. But in general, it was a really, really bad play on his part. And he's really just, like I say, he's minimizing the money that he can win, and he's maximizing the amount of money that he can lose. And that's one of the frustrating things about poker, is that you can do everything right and still lose. And you can do everything wrong and win. And a lot of times what will happen is somebody will do a lot of wrong stuff, but then they get lucky and they win. And it reinforces in their head that they made the right play. Because a lot of times, it's obvious to you and you slip and you fall and you break your arm or something like that happens in life, you kind of immediately begin to think, hey, maybe I did something wrong. But when good stuff happens to you, most of the time, you just kind of pat yourself on the back and you did something, fantastic. You did something great and you don't really learn from it. So in this particular situation, him making that play and winning from it was probably the worst thing that could have happened. But in this particular case, he ended up winning the hand, and so that was my night. I ended up playing for several hours, had a lot of fun, and ended up going home with $300 less in my pocket than I started with, but that's okay. So anyways, folks, thanks for listening to part 3 here. I hope that maybe you learned a little bit of something. I'm working hard to get some new video equipment, looking hard to get some editing equipment, and I'm hoping to have a hand replayer and be able to get some footage so that when I'm talking about poker hands here in the very near future, there's actually some visual aids, some stuff that you can be looking at instead of having to try to keep track of all of the action in your head. So with that, folks, have a great night. Enjoy part 3. This is day 38. Day 38, Wednesday. I guess it's Wednesday, February 27th today, I hope. And I think it's Wednesday, February 27th, which is day 28 or day 38 of the Gem and YouTube challenge. And that is still going fantastic too, folks. So with that, have a great night. We'll talk to you tomorrow.